By request, today we are looking at a Traptrix deck. Traptrix is another one of the many archetypes in Yu-Gi-Oh! That has an interesting concept, or shtick as it were, but was not effectively designed, limiting the ability of the traits of that archetype to find a lot of success against most other decks in the meta. To add insult to injury, Konami, as again with a number of other archetypes, has not even bothered to really finish the archetype, as it only has 6 monsters, no spells, and no traps to its name. For those who might want to protest about Traptrix Trap Hole Nightmare, that's not a Traptrix card, it's a generic Trap Hole card. The lack of Traptrix cards is one of the biggest problems for this deck, but that issue notwithstanding, let's see what my Traptrix deck looks like. If one ignores the lack of Traptrix cards, one still sees numerous concerns with a potential Traptrix deck build, especially in this modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Meta. One problem with Traptrix harkens back to the problem faced by Gemini and Counter Fairy decks, where the Traptrix shtick is whole normal trap card, but that interaction does not produce enough bonuses for the modern meta. Some may attempt to counter-argue that due to the success of Hat, Hand, Artifact, and Traptrix decks from the past, this criticism isn't really valid. But first, those decks were from 3+ years ago, and second, those decks lived more off of the field control provided by the hands, Fire and Ice, which were just ridiculous at that point in time, and Morale Tech popping out of the deck via Sanctum, or the lockdown of Scythe coming out of the deck via Sanctum, versus the overall usefulness of the Traptrix monsters. They were there just as a small little engine to accompany the hands and the artifact aspects of the deck. Another problem is that the base of their shtick is just bad and unfortunately too generic. The problem with all of the whole normal trap cards being generic is this is one of the times where Konami decided to show restraint in their generic card design versus, let's just make it crazy broken. And the demonstration of this restraint, because the card was generic, really hurts the aspect of the Traptrix deck shtick. For example, at least Counter Fairies had a variety of cards that could trigger their corresponding effect and provide a better ability to reduce the opponent's playmaking opportunities. The big problem with the whole trap cards is they all basically do the same thing 99% of the time, and that's some form of one-for-one removal that actually has some level of restrictions on a number of the cards, limiting their overall value. This lack of quality synergistic card play really hurt this trait aspect of this archetype. While these are not all of the problems, they are the major ones with designing a Traptrix deck, and it's too bad, for when looking at the limited cards available in the Traptrix family, there are some pretty good cards in that bunch. Myrmeleo is a +1 1600 attacker when normal summoned, nets a normal hole trap, and most often than not, that's going to be a bottomless trap hole, in addition to being a -1 against the opponent, commonly, but not all the time, when special summoned. Dionaea is a +1 with further plussing or negatives based on the monster you summon when it's normal summoned via its special summoned effect, and could be an amazing Traptrix monster if Traptrix ever received more quality monsters to give it more variety in what this normal summon, special summon from the graveyard effect could accomplish. And it's a temporary +1 and a tempo influencer when special summoned with that temporarily grab a whole trap from the graveyard and set it on your field effect. The newest card, Mantis, is not game breaking but solid as a +1 when normal summoned and offers some nice protection for back row cards, significantly increasing their usefulness because it creates apprehension in the opponent to whether or not they want to go quote-unquote destruction fishing. Nepenthes could have been a great card with the right new support, but right now I feel it's just too inconsistent to actually be useful. And Attract has the most attack points, but that's the most appealing aspect of it. And at 1800, it's not really worth it, for its effect is rather minuscule in its usefulness, especially now that Mantis exists. However, the piece de resistance in the Traptrix family is their XZ boss monster, Traptrix Rafflesia, which, let's be real, this card probably would be on the short list for getting limited, if not outright banned, if it was in a better supported deck. Although its generic use certainly got some people wondering whether or not this card should be banned in the past. Immune to trap effects while having material, activates whole normal traps from the deck for a simple material cost, commonly netting a +1 and just being outright annoying for the opponent. 2500 defensive body, which is nothing to sneeze at, and the big reason why it's so great in Traptrix, it grants destruction and target immunity for all other Traptrix monsters. Overall, in my opinion, the general strategy of the Traptrix deck does revolve around getting Rafflesia on the field as fast as possible and going from there. The revelation of this being the strategy for a Traptrix deck is amazingly shocking, I know. So, with the introduction over, let's get to the build. For the monsters, I run 3 copies of Myrmeleo, 2 copies of Dionaea, and 3 copies of Mantis. The reason I only run 2 copies of Dionaea is that unless you're running a discard-based build where you're using things like Dark World Dealings and Lightning Vortex, Dionaea is not really a good go-first card because of the lack of effectiveness of its normal summons ability, and this is if you're going first or second overall. It's just not a good first turn card, in my opinion. Despite some of the inefficiency with Manta's effect of bouncing a set card back to your hand, 3 copies are nice for the searching ability and the protection play chicken with the opponent effect ability, especially in this particular build. For the remaining monsters, I run 3 copies of Thunder King Rai-Oh to limit the playmaking capacity of the opponent, because almost all decks can outrun, in a sense, this deck. So you do need a card like Thunder King, in my opinion, in this deck to try to, at times, put the brakes on the opponent. It tends to do a lot more than just a hand trap. Also, the special summons negation ability is nice as well. One of the chief priorities of this deck is summoning Rafflesia as fast as possible, so I need to run monsters to facilitate this strategy in 3 copies of Goblindbergh and 2 copies of Kagetokage, in addition to 1 copy of Abyss Actor Curtain Riser. I only choose to run 1 copy of Curtain Riser because multiple copies tend to be dead because you can only use its summons from the Pendulum Zone effect once per duel, but other people may favor multiple copies to enhance the probability of getting that first effect off. Finally, the deck needs a monster with a removal angle, and I find that 2 copies of Eater of Millions fits the bill rather nicely due to the trap effects of this deck that can somewhat back up and work very effectively with the general strategy of Eater of Millions, because Eater can handle almost any monster in the game one-on-one, but when your opponent tries to flood the board to overpower Eater, as it were, or make a play that to get rid of Eater before going into the battle phase, that's where the trap lineup can come in handy to produce those negatives against your opponent, even if you have to sacrifice Eater in the process. In addition, the fact that this deck does not run an extra deck that is super critical outside of a few cards to its success, you definitely have the fuel to summon Eaters. For the spells, I like the standard 1 copy of Raigeki, 1 copy of Upstart Goblin, and 1 copy of Monster Reborn for field clearance, some increased speed, and producing field presence. Finally, helping Rafflesia summoning once again, I run 2 copies of Instant Fusion for an easy level 4 monster from the extra deck to complement the normal summons of a monster to go right into Rafflesia. In association with Rafflesia, the trap cards, in my opinion, are the star of the deck. But unlike a lot of other Traptrix builds, I do not run a lot of full normal trap cards because, in my opinion, opposing meta decks are just too fast for the one-to-one trades to work well, when they are all you have as a defensive measure. Therefore, while I run the understandable 3 copies of Bottomless Trap Hole, thanks to Rafflesia's trap immunity and providing anti-destruction to other Traptrix monsters, I run a full board of mass removal traps. 3 copies of Torrential Tribute, 3 copies of Blind Obliteration, 3 copies of Needle Sealing. Needle Sealing, I continue in a sense to champion this card in certain decks because its activation condition in this just vomit out a board era of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is ridiculously easy to get off and can be pretty debilitating to certain opponent decks. And 3 copies of Storming Mirror Force, along with 1 copy of Solemn Judgment. The reason these traps are important is the unfinished nature of the Traptrix archetype, for it limits its overall explosiveness. Therefore, as I alluded to with Thunder King, you have to have a deck, if you want to run Traptrix, that provides consistent scenarios of either putting the brakes on the opponent, hey, you can't do this, i.e. Thunder King, or if you want to put in some various floodgates, or you need to produce scenarios of large negative to limit the ability of the opponent to run over this deck. I prefer board clearers because board clearers are almost always good. They're good after your opponent has established the board or before they've established the board. Floodgates, your opponent's already established that board, you got problems, and that floodgate's really not going to help you. While Rafflesia does net some nice negative ones with its effect, the sad thing about her is she can only be activated twice in lieu of really putting some inefficient design in your deck. So I feel, once again, this deck needs those big negative cards to really help it survive. For the extra deck, it's not super important, but the focus is on some good rank 4s and single monster link monsters, aka Linkuriboh. The reason you run Linkuriboh is to get rid of those Rafflesias that might have run out of material to clear the way to summon a 2nd or 3rd copy. So I run 2 copies of Darkfire Dragon. Again, this is any level 4 that can be summoned via instant fusion. 1 number S39 Utopia the Lightning, 1 number S39 Utopia, 1 Cairngorgon Antiluminscent Knight, 1 Tornado Dragon, 1 number 41 Bagoska, 1 number 101 Silent Honor Arc. I run Honor Arc because you can steal an opponent's monster and then you'll still be able to shrug off a Torrential Tribute Destruction or something else from your back row. 1 Gagaga Samurai, double attacking 1900, 3800 total direct damage after you've stopped their play with one of your mass removals. 1 Gagaga Cowboy, 3 Traptrix Rafflesias, of course. You can technically get by with 2, but this is a Traptrix deck, so if you can, definitely max out on the 3. And the 2 Linkuribohs, which are expensive now, but really should be quite affordable when the reprint comes out. In the end, I feel Traptrix could have been a very interesting archetype if designed a little differently in its initial card design, or was actually completed. Basically, it needs at least 3, probably 5, 6 more good cards, and you might have something that would really be interesting to play. Unfortunately, the first didn't happen, and it's highly unlikely the second ever will, because, again, Konami just seems to have this mindset of spit out as many new archetypes as possible because new is cool and sexy and will sell, and people just forget and not care about the old, which does have some truth to it, but I think is also a missed opportunity. Unfortunately, because of these 2 big issues, Traptrix remains stuck in a form of stasis in a competitive sense. Well, that is my Traptrix deck. Thank you for your attention and your time. I'm out.